I wanted to build also on some of what you had mentioned about the messaging on the voter registration amendment. And this is not an excuse, although it may come off as that a little bit, but also I think what you just said was really important is that we had a lot less time. By the time we figured out a message that actually could combat really deep-seated racism around the state, that basically, and you know how the story goes, that black people and illegal aliens, and I'm using those terms intentionally, are stealing the vote and taking away the vote from you, white person who is really a legal voter and should be voting. By the time we got to that message, it was like mid-August. And so we had this, we call them the 3 C's, the costs, the complications, and the consequences. And within that, we allowed communities kind of on their own terms to talk about all 3, to talk about 1, to talk about 2, to kind of define that on their own terms, but to come back to consequences for your voting constituency, to costs. And it might be a human cost, it might be a financial cost. In many cases it was financial, but in some cases it was human cost, which it should be. And then there were the complications that kind of, I think, were universal. But the send it back message was actually, and I thought about this more almost after the election, was actually to give some civil space to people who actually did have deep-seated fears over voter fraud and who actually thought voter fraud exists, and if it exists, we have to that's the problem, so this must be the solution. And we had to put up a barrier. In fact, we intentionally did not want to talk about voter fraud. We didn't want to run around saying there is no voter fraud, because the minute you use the F word, or felons voting, which was the other F word, it kind of put up this perception that then people wanted to go there. And our goal was to stop this thing. And so if send it back gave a few, a chunk of the population space to vote it down and maybe send it back, so be it. We'll deal with that, when we get to it. Obviously, all of us on stage and others are not going to take up any form of a bill that way. In fact, we're going to go the other way in terms of progressive voting rights. But that's a little bit of the messaging strategy that was behind it. And so trust me, there were deep conversations, deep conflicts and tensions that a lot of people had, including myself, but that is kind of how we came about that and came up with the 3 C's. So that was helpful, I think, in terms of your civility conversation.
I do think there's some space for it. I'm not sure if I have this story right, but I thought that the Minnesota nice vote no twice was just kind of...
I hated that.
You hated it?
I was going to say right
yeah.
now. I hated it viscerally and for all sorts of strategic reasons, but...
I loved it.
Minnesota nice vote twice?
That's awesome.
I never heard that.
I did. I loved it. I thought that the story behind it was that it was just a person that wanted to get involved, that was a graphic designer, and it made sense to her. And you probably have really smart reasons why you hated it. I just was like, this is nice. This is actually the Minnesota nice that I'm talking about. Because I think it's kind of I think Minnesota nice is like frosting on top of a lot of yucky stuff that people don't like to dig beneath. But back to the hope for civil society, I think that a couple things. One is that Beth Newkirk, again, and others brought and shared a lot of the messages from Voices for Voting Rights and brought folks, white folks, allies, to the red carpet event that we held. And I think that along with not taking our communities of color and American Indian communities for granted, we need to not take white, smart voters for granted that believe in rights for all of us and for people of color, because there's a lot of white people in the state, right, that are smart and get it and want to be a part of something bigger and want to make change. And so I think that a lot of these messages about the average voter and this and that doesn't really speak to some of the people that want to be a part of something big and want to make a big change. I think if we look back in the state, I just heard the other day that I think it was Floyd Olson, and I hope I have my history right, But I think he was one of the first people in the country to really press criminal charges against the Ku Klux Klan. And I'm imagining in Minnesota that wasn't very popular at that time. This was a long time ago. And I'm guessing he was off message. So for a lot of people, they were probably like, oh, it wasn't really that bad, right? They're okay. But he was like, no, this is not right. This is not what I came here for, and, so forth. So I think there's a lot more risk-taking and truth-telling. Yeah, sorry.
No, I just want to let Monica to comment just for a couple minutes, and then I know we're getting close to time, so if there's people that haven't talked, and Ernesto wants to say something again, Anna wants to say something, let's make them quick. Oh, we got another one up there then, too?
Great.
Yeah. Oh, we do? Okay, good. I got other
So this civil conversation, so some of it was strategic around the marriage amendment. So you can't, LGBT people are about 3 to 5%, the people that are out are about 3 to 5% of the Minnesota population. And so we know strategically we can't be a bunch of screaming queers and actually win. But also I think that the way that we found, I think, like I mentioned before, through the past conversations, we thought we would try to appeal to people's heads on a lot of progressive issues, right? A lot of progressive issues of like, we've got the facts down and the facts are on our side, so we'll win. And that hasn't worked just on a lot of issues, right? And so I think on this issue, we really found that if we went to the mat and actually opened up our heart and did the most vulnerable thing you could ever do, which is say, knock on some stranger's door and say like, so here's who my family is, and here's what this means to me about what this amendment means. This means that my family's life is on the line, and that you're telling my family, you're telling all kinds of youth in this state, it's not okay to be who they are. And that actually has huge consequences for the future of our state. Now, that's where I went. That wasn't quite on message. But that's actually what I hear working at Outfront forever is just how many people who are petrified just to be out about who they love and who they are, and that they might decide to never share their whole selves with anyone ever because they're so afraid of losing everything that they have. And that still happens every day in our state. And when that happens, that means that people aren't being authentic. And that means that they're not able to really fully participate. And it means that they're not having good lives. And we hear it from the youth they just don't know where to go. They just don't have anywhere to go. And this amendment in the states that it's passed in the majority, it's passed in like 30 states, right? That I just, you hear from people who say they look around in a room and they go to the movie and they're like, I'm so excited to see Lincoln or whatever. I can't wait to see, James Bond or whatever. And then they look around the room and they think, wow, 75% voted and said it's not okay just to be me. I don't know what to think about this room. I don't know what to think about this state. And so I'm really excited that we sent a really different message. Mm-hmm. I'm really excited about what that means, particularly for the youth and particularly for the people who feel so isolated. And I think one of the things that I found out on the voter restriction was just how much work we have to do around immigration, and just that was, the same. I felt like I was calling the same people on the marriage amendment as we were calling on the voter restriction. I was like, you're 85 and your name is Milda, you're in Egan, and I just called you yesterday on this other issue, and now you talked about something anti-immigrant, and so I do feel like it just reminded me of just all the work we have to do, and how some people, it was really easy to say, well, which amendment I'm going to vote no on. But I will say the youth, you didn't even have to talk about either of the amendments with a lot of the young people. They're like, I'm just voting no. Like, I'm going to vote no, and we don't even have to talk about it. Like, I'm going to get other people to vote no. And that was really, really exciting and promising.